please stand for the procession.
Please be seated. As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to Kingswood College. The opening words, as said by Nelson Mandela soon after his retirement from public office, resonate today. And they serve to remind us all of our duty as citizens in a world where injustice still exists. We gather today to honour the memory of Neil Aggett and all those brave men and women who laid down their lives in the fight for human rights and social justice. Firstly, to our guest speaker, Advocate Varney, we are honoured to have you with us today and look forward to your address. Thank you for being part of this auspicious occasion in our calendar. Mrs. Jill Berger, Neil Aggett's sister, and Mrs. Mavis Aggett, his sister-in-law. We are so pleased that you could be with us today and to be part of this memorial service that honours Neil's life. It is, as always, a privilege to host you at Kingswood College. A welcome to our Vice Chairman of Council, Mr. Richard Gaber, and fellow councillors who have joined us. My apologies. And also to delegates from Rhodes University and in particular staff from the Neil Aggett Labour Institute. Headmasters and representatives from Grahamstown schools, staff, special guests, old Kingswoodians, parents, we welcome you all here today. To the current pupils of Kingswood, I welcome you as well. As the youth of our society, I hope that what you take away from today will enhance and serve to remind you of the important role you play in making a difference in this world. In the words of Mahatma Gandhi, be the change you wish to see in the world. At this 18th Neil Aggett Memorial Lecture, I extend a special word of welcome to Mr. Keith James, and I make mention of Mr. Neil Hartzenberg and Mr. Rob Charlton. They preserved, inspired, and organized this event in the years gone by. They certainly, through this event, kept the memory of Neil Aggett alive at Kingswood and have instilled in our past and current learners values that will continue to impact on society in a positive manner. I now call upon our college head, Mr. Neil Aggett, to come forward and address you.
Honored guests, special guests, Advocate Howard Varney, members of the Aggett family, members of the McCundon family, and the audience. My talk today is one that is deeply personal to me, and it's based on celebrating diversity, but first to celebrate our common humanity. Diversity is our country's greatest strength, but too often our differences drive us apart, rather than bring us together. The problem, as I see it, is that if we take diversity as our starting point, we face a myriad of worldviews and norms which we will probably never fully understand or assimilate. But what if we looked at diversity from a different angle? Why not begin with what we all have in common? And that is our humanity. All of us share the desire to work, to be safe, to build a healthy life and family, to contribute in some way to our society. We share the same fears and we share the same hopes and dreams. Humanity is a great leveler. It precedes values and beliefs, culture and norms, nationality, race, religion, gender, lifestyle, education, class or sexual orientation. When we focus on humanity, we see that we are all interdependent, and that diversity is a living expression of difference rather than a divisive and complex force to be managed. Neil Aggett grew up in a time where South Africa had a systematic approach to amplify our differences, and he was seen by many as a terrorist or as a communist because of this amplification. But Neil was able to see the common humanity in all South Africans, and his actions were a direct result of this. It is only when you acknowledge a common humanity that you can celebrate diversity. Before this, you will use diversity as a tool to dehumanize others. I too grew up in a world where the South African state dehumanized others. Apartheid was designed to dehumanize. And I sometimes think that we still live in a world that dehumanizes others. But now the face of that dehumanization is the poverty within our country. What I do know is that when we acknowledge that our common humanity, it encourages us to look beyond our superficial differences and connect on a deeper level. It fosters a sense of solidarity and empathy, making us more inclined to help one another in times of need. It inspires us to act with compassion and understanding, paving the way for a more inclusive and unified world. Advocate Howard Varney has been instrumental in many truth and reconciliation processes around the globe. For me, these are processes that call for us to acknowledge each other's pain and grief, to see each other as equals and to acknowledge our shared humanity. To contextualize for our school, I've chosen 2 points to highlight on how Kingswood's community celebrates our common humanity and uses our diversity as a tool for teaching. The first is a phrase that I'm sure we all know from our Sunday church services. It is the phrase, "We who are many are one body, for we all partake in the one bread." It's a powerful metaphor that speaks to the deep interconnectedness and unity of humanity. Originating from a religious context, specifically within the Christian tradition, this statement emphasizes the spiritual and communal bond that forms among individuals who share in a common ritual or belief. However, the underlying message of unity and shared essence transcends religious boundaries and speaks to a universal truth applicable to the broader human experience. At its core, this metaphor highlights the concept of our common humanity. Just as many grains of wheat are ground to make a single loaf of bread, so too are we, as individuals with diverse backgrounds and experience, brought together to form a single, cohesive school community. The act of partaking in the one bread symbolizes our shared experiences, struggles, joys, and the fundamental needs that bind us as human beings. It serves as a reminder that our strength lies in our unity and our ability to recognize ourselves in each other. It encourages empathy, compassion, and understanding, fostering an environment where mutual respect and love can flourish. The second part of this contextualization is the Zulu greeting. As many of you would know, I come from KwaZulu-Natal, and we have members of our community from this lovely province as well. And the Zulu greeting, Sawubona, holds profound significance that transcends a mere salutation, embodying a deep philosophical and cultural understanding of our human interconnectedness. In English, Sawubona translates to, "I see you." However, its meaning delves much deeper than a simple act of visual recognition. It is an acknowledgement of the other person's existence, value, and dignity. It is an affirmation that says, "You are important to me. You are valued. Your personal and cultural identity is acknowledged." It's a powerful testament to the Zulu people's insight into our common humanity. It transcends the superficial aspects of interaction and touches on the essence of our human connection, seeing and acknowledging each other, not just with our eyes, but with our hearts and our spirits. In a world often divided by differences, Sawubona serves as a reminder of the fundamental human truth that we are all interconnected, and that recognizing and honoring each other's humanity is essential for communal harmony and personal relationships. In the words of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, on the International Day of Nonviolence, observed on the 2nd of October, he said the following: "Our world confronts grave challenges, growing inequalities, rising tensions, proliferating conflicts, and worsening climate chaos. We also see divides deepening within countries, with democracy under threat and hate speech and intolerance on the march. We can overcome these afflictions and chart a course towards a brighter, more peaceful future if we understand that the magnificent diversity of our human family is a treasure, not a threat. If we invest in social cohesion, nurture the courage to compromise, and the determination to cooperate. If we ensure that all of us, regardless of status, background, circumstances, or faith, live a life of dignity, opportunity, and rights.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, special guests, and members of the Kingswood family. It's a great honour to be able to present the Neil Aggett Award this morning, but before I do announce the winner, I would like to take a minute just to talk to the award. And whilst I know much of this is in the booklet, I do think it is worth addressing before we make the citation and announcement. The Neil Aggett Award is inspired, obviously, by the late Dr. Neil Aggett. The award is a gift to Kingswood from the members of the class of 1970 who attended school with him between 1964 and 1970, and those who actually matriculated with him in their final year. The inspiration for the award is derived from the fact that his peers wish to honour the memory of all brave men and women who have fought for human rights in South Africa, and most particularly the memory of an exceptional young school friend, Neil Aggett. The purpose of the award is to foster a spirit of individual service above self in the young men and women of Kingswood College. It should pay tribute to the recipient's true commitment to a wider social responsibility within the college, as well as to the greater community of Grahamstown and South Africa. The sculpture that is presented with the award was crafted by Maureen Quinn, who is a highly regarded national and internationally reputable artist, and probably one of the Eastern Cape's finest sculptresses. The class decided that rather than present a more conventional trophy or shield, they believed in it totally appropriate to use a significant and almost iconic piece of local art as the trophy, since Neil had a creative soul in himself. And so it gives me great pleasure, and I think Mr. Kazia and Advocate Varney, if you maybe come up while I read this to present. Gives us honor to award this year. This year's recipient of the Neil Aggett Award is a remarkable young woman characterized by her self-driven commitment to positively impact the lives of others, possessing profound respect for her fellow human beings. She exemplifies inner courage in advocating for those unable to advocate for themselves. Demonstrating proactive leadership in project planning and implementation, she actively engages in community work, reflecting a deep understanding of broader social and environmental issues within both the Kingswood community and beyond. Throughout her years at Kingswood College, she has evolved into a young lady of strong character, valuing integrity and respect for others. Her selflessness, generosity, and unwavering moral compass set her apart. Evident in her numerous initiatives to interact on other platforms, her commitment to serving others led to her being honoured with the Ross College Service Trophy for outstanding community service contribution. Her ability to think independently, envision effective change, and execute plans stands out prominently. Through motivation and encouragement, she raises awareness in her community, earning widespread respect from both staff and students at Kingswood College. Generous with her time, she embodies honesty, authenticity, and empathy. Described as a person of moral courage and integrity, she not only understands social and environmental issues, but also reflects on them, making thoughtful decisions. In embodying these qualities, she mirrors the late Neil Aggett and continues to significantly impact those around her. Kingswood College proudly bestows the prestigious Neil Aggett Award upon Leona Aggett.
Mine this morning is very small, yet important. It is the role of introducing our guest speaker this morning. As mentioned, our guest speaker is a renowned legal practitioner, Advocate Howard Varney. As I said, he is a distinguished legal practitioner who has transcended as a true activist of human rights, both here in South Africa and abroad. He's matriculated at Durban High School in KwaZulu-Natal. He went on to study law at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. At the University of Natal, he was troubled by the evident educational disparities in South African education system at that time. While at UKZN, he interacted with the Student Representative Council, to which he was elected as a member, where he sat as an executive committee and as an uplifting officer in that Student Representative Council. As an uplifting officer, his role was to publicize and hand out pamphlets in amongst other roles. He used that opportunity to disguise the He used the university's facilities to mount campaigns of various campaigns to oppose various forms of apartheid. He was also very active in the movement to oppose increasing militarization of the South African system and the apartheid regime. And how he did this, he mobilized campaigns to end the military conscription. Upon completing his law degree, he moved to Port Elizabeth, Geneva, to pursue his legal activities or his legal articles. In Geneva, he became an active member of the Port Elizabeth Action Committee, which was very active in opposing apartheid activities like keeping facilities and amenities such as swimming pools, which were reserved for white people only at the time. In 1990, he was once a part of organizing a March for Hope in PE. This was one significant event where approximately 1,000 white people marched from PE Central to New Brighton, a township in Port Elizabeth. And this was a resounding success of unity in those days of segregation, where approximately 150,000 township residents came out to welcome them. Upon completing his legal articles, Advocate Varney went back to KZN and continued with anti-apartheid work while at the Legal Resources Center, and worked with various local and international organizations such as Swedish Council of Churches and many others. As an attorney at the Legal Resource Center in Durban, he represented many victims of political violence in public interest hearings, judicial inquest, and commissions of inquiry. In the mid-1990s, he established and led an independent criminal investigation in South Africa into an organized political crime. He was the chief investigator for the Sierra Leone Truth and Reconciliation Commission and has worked with several truth commissions around the world, including our own Truth and Reconciliation in 1995. Advocate Varney has assisted with the development of transitional justice initiative in several countries in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, America, and the Balkans. He continues to represent victims of past conflicts in courts of South Africa to vindicate their rights. He represented the families of Neil Aggett, Ahmed Timor, and others in the reopened inquests in their deaths in detention. Advocate Howard Varney is a practicing barrister at the Johannesburg Legal Bar and is a senior program advisor with the International Center for Transitional Justice. He is also an advocate of High Court of South Africa. He is a member of AJAR Justice and Rights International Board of Advisors. He is a faculty member of the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, and is a member of the London-based Guernica 37 International Justice Chamber. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Honorable Advocate Howard Varney.
So firstly, thank you for that wonderful introduction. You managed to bring back memories that I scarcely remember myself. So thank you for that meticulous research. Firstly, I wish to thank Kingswood College, and in particular the head of college, for inviting me to your school this morning. It really is a great honor to address a school with such an illustrious history. It's also a particular privilege to be asked to address and give the 2024 Neil Aggett Memorial Lecture. I also want to acknowledge the presence of the Aggett family, Jill Berger and Mavis Aggett. Jill and Mavis, it was a real privilege to represent you and the Aggett family in the reopened inquest to look into what actually happened to you. The Aggett family have endured a long journey to reach some truth and closure. Neil's parents, Aubrey and Joy, and brother Michael, went to their graves without that closure. They had to live and die with a manifestly false version, a false official version of what happened to Neil. And we know what that version was, and nobody was to blame. The Aggett family, Neil's partner, Liz Floyd, his friends and comrades, had to wait 38 years for the inquest to be reopened. And it must be asked, why did they have to wait so long? Why 38 years? I will return to that question shortly. Now, Neil's short life was a selfless one. Notwithstanding his privileged upbringing, he dedicated himself to working for the most vulnerable in society. And those choices that he made deeply offended those in authority. They saw those choices as a deep betrayal of what South Africa stood for at that time, which was white supremacy. His young, promising life was cut down in the early hours of 5th February 1982. The security branch meted out unrelenting brutality against Neil. Their malice and their cruelty led directly to his death. The decision of Magistrate Kotza in the first inquest that nobody was to blame was a product of a deeply flawed legal system. It was also the product of a conspiracy by the police to cover up and prevent the Aggett family from knowing the truth of what happened to Neil. It was the product of intimidation. Witnesses, particularly police witnesses, knew what they had to say in court. And they did the bidding of their masters. And if they didn't, there would have been repercussions. That decision was the product of a corrupt magistrate and a corrupt prosecutor who were willing to do the bidding of the security branch. They were willing to avert their gaze from the actual truth. In short, it was the product of the police state. Liz Floyd, as I mentioned at the time, she was Neil's partner. She was detained with Neil. She herself went through a great deal of interrogation. Following Neil's death, she was severely traumatized. She testified in the Truth Commission hearing in 1996. She called on the interrogators of Neil to come forward and speak and disclose the truth. None of them did. Now, clearly at that time, nobody expected the apartheid state to investigate themselves. And the Truth Commission noted in its report that there were no prosecutions of the individuals responsible for torturing and killing activists in detention. In its final report, the TRC found the police, in particular the security branch, responsible for the detention, torture, and death in detention of Neil. The Truth Commission then referred hundreds of cases, between 300 and 400 cases, to the National Prosecuting Authority, the NPA, with the request that these cases should be taken further. These were cases in which perpetrators had either been denied amnesty or did not apply for amnesty. And there were cases in which there was evidence to proceed. Needless to say, they were all very serious cases involving deaths, murders, assassinations, massacres. The Aggett case was included in the list. So what happened? Notwithstanding the findings of the Truth Commission, notwithstanding the referral of these cases, as we stand here today, very few of those cases have been taken forward. Prosecutors and detectives in post-apartheid South Africa, I regret to say, were not moved to act on these matters. I'm pleased to say that in recent years, from around 2018 onwards, that has begun to change. We have now seen encouraging action on behalf of the NPA and the Directorate of Priority Crimes Investigations, investigation unit of the South African Police Service. But why has it taken them so long to take action? Why post the Truth Commission, why post the tabling of its report in 2002? Did it take this long? Why did they pretend in all these years, more than 20 years, that they were investigating when in fact they were not? So I want to spend a little time dealing with what happened, and it's under the heading of political interference. And political interference, unfortunately, is a scourge that many countries have to face. Political interference into the work of prosecutors and police officers. As we know, under our Constitution, for the budding lawyers here, you will know that under the Constitution, under the National Prosecuting Authority Act, the NPA is vested with a measure of independence when it comes to taking decisions on who to prosecute and who not to prosecute. That is the decision alone of the National Prosecuting Authority and nobody else. And it is illegal to interfere in the decisions of prosecutors. Not only is it illegal, but it is also a crime, a very serious crime under the NPA Act, but also under the Prevention of Organised Crime Act. And it actually carries a serious jail penalty for those who interfere in the work of prosecutors. We now know why these cases never saw the light of day for so many years. It has emerged in recent court cases. I happen to be involved in all of them. That powerful elements in society shamefully colluded to ensure the suppression of all the cases referred by the Truth Commission to the National Prosecuting Authority. In 2021, the Supreme Court of Appeal, dealing with an application by a man named Jean Rodriguez, he was a lowly security branch sergeant in the 1970s. And in his version, he was in the room when Ahmed Timol allegedly, on their version, committed suicide by jumping out of the 10th floor window at John Foster Square in downtown Johannesburg. He testified in the reopened inquest in 2017. And Judge Motley, who presided over that case, found that Jean Rodriguez had lied under oath and perpetuating the cover-up of what happened to Ahmed Timol. For those who don't know, we were able to demonstrate in that case that Timol did not jump, he did not commit suicide. In fact, his physical state at the time would have prevented him from even standing up. He had a cracked ankle and multiple other injuries, including a fractured skull, and these were all injuries that occurred before his death. They were not related to the fall from the 10th floor window in 1026. So he was meant to face justice, and indeed he was charged with murder and various other crimes. He applied to court for a permanent stay of his prosecution, claiming that the long delay denied him a fair trial. That case was dismissed. He then went to the Supreme Court of Appeal. In our papers, we explained that much of the delay, at least post-1994, was attributable to this political interference, and that he, in fact, had benefited from that political interference. It had protected him. And so that evidence was before both the High Court and the Supreme Court of Appeal. And the judgment of the SCA, they said it was, quite perplexing and inexplicable why these cases were suppressed, particularly given that the Truth Commission had called for robust prosecutions and given the enshrined independence under law and the Constitution of the NPA. So what do we know about this political interference? Well, there's a lot that we don't know. In fact, we have called for probes. We've called for an independent commission of inquiry. We've written on multiple occasions to the proposal seeking the appointment of a commission of inquiry under the Commissions Act with all the proper powers of subpoena and the ability to hold public hearings. All those attempts so far have fallen on deaf ears. And I can tell you we do intend to take that matter further. What I'm going to do now is just give you a high-level overview of what we're in fact aware of. So we have hearsay evidence that in the mid to late 1990s through to around early 2003, there were a few meetings that took place between former South African Defence Force generals, as well as some business people, and senior officials from the African National Congress, including Jacob Zuma and Thabo Mbeki. We don't know what was said at those meetings. We do know that attempts were made, at least to explore ways of ensuring that there would be no criminal accountability for those who did not receive amnesty. We are hoping that should a Commission of Inquiry be appointed, the ultimate truth will emerge. In what follows, we actually do have documentary evidence. Starting with the public event in March 2003, when the final report of the Truth Commission was tabled before a joint sitting of Parliament, Thabo Mbeki accepted the report and gave a speech. That speech is online and can be viewed at any time. What was interesting about the speech was a statement he made that those who were not able or did not take part in the Truth Commission, and in particular the amnesty process, former President Mbeki said they needed to be accommodated. He did not mention how they were going to be accommodated, but that certainly set the scene of what was to follow. Within a few months, steps were being taken to accommodate these perpetrators. We know that during 2003, an unofficial moratorium was imposed on the investigation and prosecution of the cases referred by the TRC to the NPA. We call them the TRC cases. The moratorium was meant to last until the arrangements had been put into place. But in effect, that moratorium lasted for more than 10 years, perhaps 14, 15 years. Now, excuse me, not long after Mbeki's address in Parliament, those in the NPA charged with dealing with these cases, and I should add that they had been classified as priority cases by the then National Director of Public Prosecution, London-based Guernica. He declared them priority cases, which meant they had to be acted upon quickly. And in pursuance of that directive, the cases were given to a unit known as the Priority Crimes Litigation Unit, and they were meant to deal with a range of priority crimes, such as terrorism, syndicated crime, but also these cases from the past. These prosecutors then went to the police, as well as the Scorpions at that time. For those who don't know, the Scorpions was an elite unit. The official name was the Directorate of Special Operations, the DSO. And previously they had been investigating some of the TRC cases. And they asked the Scorpions, and they asked the SAPs for investigators. What was the response of the SAPs and the Scorpions? You can't have any investigators. When the NPA followed up and wrote a letter to a Deputy Commissioner of SAPs at the time, pressing the need for investigators, because after all, in South Africa, prosecutors and investigators are separate functions and separate departments. Prosecutors have to rely on the police to carry out their investigations. The police have to put together dockets and hand them to the prosecutors. And the response, the remarkable response from the SAPS was that these cases were a political matter, and that if the NPA wanted the TRC cases investigated, they would have to get a written instruction from the President. Now, isn't that a remarkable response from the police to the National Prosecuting Authority? If they want a few hundred murders and massacres investigated, they have to get a sign-off from the President himself. We don't know whether the NPA approached the President, and we assume that they didn't. In 2004, the Directors General Forum met in order to give effect to the President's directions to make arrangements for these perpetrators. That forum in turn set up a multi-departmental committee that was called the Amnesty Task Team. And there's no coincidence that the word amnesty appeared in the name of that team. And essentially they were asked to make proposals on how to avoid justice in these cases. Not only was an Amnesty Task Team set up, but there was even a Cabinet Committee established called the Cabinet Committee on Post-TRC Matters. And you may ask, why would Cabinet set up a subcommittee to deal with cases that are in the hands of the National Prosecuting Authority, who enjoy exclusive jurisdiction to deal with those cases? To cut a long story short, that Amnesty Task Team eventually made a number of proposals. They did consider the possibility of a fresh amnesty, and in fact they drafted a new amnesty indemnity bill, which they presented to government. They cautioned against an amnesty because they predicted that it would be struck down in the courts. But they did recommend the amending of the prosecution policy to allow prosecutors to engage in what was an effective rerun of the amnesty process behind closed doors. They introduced new criteria to allow prosecutors to decline to prosecute, including criteria that, where a perpetrator was indoctrinated through, apartheid era Christian national education and the like, that would be a ground for refusing to prosecute. They also recommended a special dispensation on political pardons to allow the President to grant pardons through a process to those who did not apply for amnesty. They then said there should be a multi-departmental committee, a standing committee, to oversee the decision-making of the NPA in these cases. And they said that everybody involved must act in the national interest, not the public interest, the national interest. And there's a big difference between the public interest and the national interest. Typically, the national interest represents the views of those in power, whereas the public interest represents the views of society in general. Now, these recommendations were implemented. Some of the proposals, such as the amendments to the prosecution policy, as well as the political pardons process, we went to court and we had both initiatives interdicted. The pardons program actually went all the way to the Constitutional Court in the Albert case, and because victims were entirely excluded from that program, the Constitutional Court set it aside. I want to give you one example of how a case was stopped in its tracks. An attempt to proceed with an attempted murder prosecution of those behind the poisoning of the Reverend Frank Chikani in the late 1980s. Prosecutors Anton Ackerman, who had been involved in the Vote of the Sun case, had evidence to show that the security branch had attempted to kill Frank Chikani, who was the head of the South African Council of Churches. He was seen as a rebel-rouser, he was a little too vocal, and he had to be silenced. Luckily for Frank, the attempted poisoning didn't work. And he was heading overseas, and the toxicology department at a foreign university, detected what was wrong with him, and they were able to treat him and save him. So in 2004, the head of the PCOU, Advocate Howard, Senior Counsel, decided to go ahead with this case. Even though he didn't have investigators, he had the evidence though, so he proceeded. On the day that he was going to effect arrests of a handful of former officers, he received a phone call. A phone call from a senior official in the Department of Justice, the executive. And he was told, don't carry out these arrests. And Anton Ackerman, who's a robust, old-time prosecutor, who believes in the rule of law, told this official what he could do. He said that he doesn't take instructions from others, particularly not illegal instructions. The official then said, well then, you'll hear from your boss, the National Director. And indeed, within a few minutes, the National Director of Public Prosecutions, called Ackerman and told him to down tools and not carry out those arrests. So if you need an example of blatant interference in the work of the NPA, there is but one example. But it carries on. In 2006, when it appeared that the then National Director, Lucy Pupil, and his team were trying to take some of these cases forward, he was then called into a range of meetings, some of them with cabinet ministers, and he was told to basically not to buck the system, and to comply with the measures that had been put in place, which effectively meant that he had to pull back from taking these cases forward. And at the end of that year, he received a written letter from the head of Police Legal Services, who said that the Committee of Directors General had met, and they had decided that the NPA could not take decisions on the TRC cases until they had received a final recommendation from that body. In other words, he couldn't go ahead until the executive said he could. This prompted Lucy Pupil to write a secret memorandum to the then Minister of Justice, Dr. to say that he and the NPA were now subject to improper interference in the work of the NPA. He never received a response to that memo. When the Franchikani case was revived in 2007, Minister of Justice, Bridget Mabandla, wrote to him and said, I'm very surprised to hear that you're going ahead with these cases. I thought that we would not go ahead with these cases from the past. So the Chikani case did proceed. There was a plea bargain, and suspended sentences were issued to Adrian Flock, former Minister of Police, and several others. 4 weeks later, the then NDPP, was suspended, and Anton Ackerman, then head of the Priority Crimes Unit, was taken off the TRC cases. There's much more to say about political interference, but time doesn't permit me to do that. But you can see that the work of the NPA was effectively stopped in its tracks. Now, recently, former President Thabo Mbeki went on record. About a week ago, he released a press statement in which he said, no member of the executive ever interfered with the work of the NPA in relation to these cases. And my response is that this denial is not consistent with the known facts. Now, the Truth Commission cases remained dead in the water for many years thereafter, until 2015, when Tembi Talamane, ironically, she's a member of Cabinet today. A bit of background to Tembi. She's the sister of the late Maputula Simelane, who in 1983 was abducted, tortured, murdered, and disappeared from the security branch. She was only 23 years old at the time. She was a courier for MK, Mkhonto Masizwe, moving between Swaziland and South Africa. So Timmy asked us to take the case forward, and of course we were getting no joy from the NPA. In fact, we've given up and said, forget about a prosecution, we have no faith in you. Give us an inquest. We can then subpoena suspects, we can then cross-examine them and hold them to account. The NPA refused to give us an inquest. They said they were still investigating. We then went to court to seek an order compelling the NPA to make a decision. That then prized the door open. That was 2015, and early 2016, the NPA in fact issued an indictment against 4 security branch suspects. I can tell you that 2 of them have since died. One is now claiming that he's mentally unfit to stand trial. And as we stand here today, some 8 years later, no trial has started. Tembi wrote an opinion piece in the City Press in 2014, and I'd like to quote from her article. We did not expect the former South African police to investigate themselves. However, we firmly believe that the new democratic South Africa would take the necessary steps. We were wrong. This was the second betrayal of Maputula and everything she stood for. This betrayal cut the deepest. We cannot bury her, and we can find no peace. The betrayal of my sister and what she stood for is almost complete. I want to turn to some cases that you might be familiar with, cases from your region, the Eastern Cape. Most of the TRC cases, unfortunately, can't be revived. Suspects, witnesses, family members have passed on. And here in the Eastern Cape, the neglect of these cases has allowed many perpetrators to go to the grave without having to face justice. I'll start with the Credit 4 case, one of the most emblematic cases from our history. I'm sure that in your studies you've come across it. But you might recall that in 1985, 4 civic leaders, teachers from Credit were abducted by the security branch, brutally tortured, and murdered, and their bodies burned in recognition. We identified nearly 50 people associated with that case. The shooters, the killers on the ground, the masterminds in Port Elizabeth, those in the State Security Council, and those up and down the chain of command. Virtually all of them have died. To the point where we can no longer push for a prosecution. Most recently, a man by the name of Humanitarian Pupil. He was the former head of the Black Affairs Unit of the security branch in Port Elizabeth. He died on the 16th of May, 2023. And he was, in fact, the last suspect we had in the Credit 4 case against whom we had evidence and against whom we believed a trial should have taken place. He was not only the mastermind behind the Credit 4, but also the gruesome murders in the Pepco 3 case, the murders of Sipiwe and Kulu, Topsy Ndaka, Geneva, Condila, amongst many others. All were tortured and horribly abused before being murdered. And frankly, it's unforgivable that people like Duplessis were allowed to pass on peacefully without having to account for their crimes. So while a third inquest is being held in the Credit 4 case that was announced in January, and will be held later this year in Port Elizabeth, the family have had to accept there will be no justice in that case. And this is after 39 years of waiting, 30 of them in the post-apartheid era, 30 years of waiting in the democratic order. In the Pepco 3 case, 3 leading civic activists were abducted in 1985, a few weeks before the Cradock 4 incident. They were taken from Port Elizabeth Airport in a joint flight class and security branch operation. And they were taken a few hundred kilometres away to the remote Post-Chalmers farm, where they were viciously tortured and murdered. Again, virtually all the suspects in that case have died. Only 3 members who were involved in those crimes survive today. One is 85 years old, another is 75 years old, and the third is 70 years old. The sands of time, the fast running out. We are working with the NPA, but I have a fear that this case will meet the same fate as the Cradock 4 case. Suspects will be allowed to die before action is taken, and then we are simply left with holding yet another inquiry. The last case I want to highlight is a case that took place in May of 1993 in East London. A group of balaclava masked men shot dead 5 patrons at the Highgate Hotel and injured 7 others. The families and survivors of this massacre have been seeking the truth for more than 30 years. Nobody applied for amnesty, and there hasn't even been an inquest held. Neville Harris, father of Dion Harris, who was one of the 5 murdered, died last year before seeing closure of home. Carl Weber, I believe, is with us today. Carl, thank you for being with us. Carl is one of the survivors of that massacre. I'm counsel in that case. We have requested an inquest. We're waiting for a decision. Carl, your endurance and courage is recognized. But the harm visited upon the affected families and their communities is incalculable. And the primary reason for this monumental failure of justice is the political interference which I described. And those behind these machinations, they knew what would happen, and they need to be held to account. The families deserve nothing more than a full, open, and public commission of inquiry to get to the bottom of what happened. Let me now return to the Aggett case. They too have been denied accountability. Lieutenant Stephen Whitehead, he was the lead interrogator, the main tormentor of Neil. He died on the 22nd of April 2019, ironically, in the same week that the Minister of Justice announced that the inquest would be reopened. At that time, he was only 62 years old. Whitehead and others could have been held to account if the authorities had acted timelessly, if they'd done their job under law and the Constitution and had not succumbed to political pressure. I want to mention another Kingswood College student from those days, Brian Sandberg. Brian was a friend and classmate of Neil here at Kingswood. He founded the Neil Aggett support group and campaigned for many years for justice. He laid criminal charges against Whitehead at the Johannesburg Central Police Station, indeed the same police station, the building where Neil died. That he did in 2013. If the authorities had acted upon that complaint, as far back as 2013, some accountability could have been secured. We could have faced Stephen Whitehead and asked him some hard questions. Brian died in 2014. So, what happened to Neil? And now I want to visit the reopened inquest that took place in 2020 and 2021. Now, getting to the truth of what happened to Neil during his detention has been a very difficult exercise. And this is because it was the police that controlled Neil no independent people were around. We have no witnesses to what happened to Neil. But we know for a fact, from the work of great lawyers like George Bezos and others, that the security branch fabricated evidence on a routine basis. They closed ranks, and that certainly happened in the Neil Aggett case, not only in the first inquest, but also the reopened inquest. We argued that Neil's death was a suicide. It was an induced suicide, for which the police were directly responsible. Their unrelenting cruelty and brutality would have produced such an outcome. And not only that, they would have known the risks that Neil was in, and they took no steps to protect him. However, we also presented cogent evidence to show that there was most likely foul play in the case of Neil Aggett. And this had much to do with what transpired in the days and hours leading up to his death, and then the clumsy attempt by the security branch to cover up their tracks after the death. And I'll give you a few examples. On the morning of his death, Neil actually made a detailed complaint to a member of the CID at Johannesburg Square about his torture and abuse. He complained that he was being kept awake. He complained that he had been assaulted. He complained that he had been electrocuted with electric shocks. Now, to my mind, the person who makes that kind of statement only hours before his death is not the statement of a man who's given up. That's the statement of a man seeking a reckoning, seeking accountability. We know that in the 3 hours before his discovery, in the early hours of the morning of 5th February 1982, in the preceding 3 hours, there were no cell visits, which is curious to say the least. And yet, those on duty fabricated entries that they had been there for their hourly visits, when in fact they hadn't. Thirdly, the presence of contraband. This is strictly prohibited material that were in Neil's cell. And the so-called instrument of death, the scarf or kikoi, should never have been there. There was evidence from security police guards who said that would never have been allowed. They weren't even allowed to keep files in shoelaces and belts. So that also raised an important question. No disciplinary action was taken against anyone for allowing contraband in the cell, allegedly doing so, or for falsifying the occurrence book. We had medical evidence to show that it couldn't be excluded that Neil was unconscious at the time of his suspension from the grill in his cell. There were observations from 2 other detainees who observed a body or a person being carried through the corridor around that time. But perhaps the most damning evidence of all was the fact that only one solitary fingerprint was lifted off the grill where he was found hanging. He would have had to climb up that grill, and yet there was only one index fingerprint at the very top where the ligature was tied, and for the rest it was simply white marks. I'll let you draw your own conclusions on that. And then lastly, the ill-fated excursion by 2 security branch officers, Whitehead himself and Sergeant Erasmus. They were sent to this school, in fact, as well as the Aggett family home. They came to Kingswood. They spoke to the then principal and other teachers. And what were they looking for? They were told to find evidence of suicidal tendencies. Needless to say, they found none. In fact, they were told that Neil was one of the best students the school had ever had. They even broke into the Aggett home in Somerset West, again looking for prescriptions or something that would indicate that Neil was suicidal. They found nothing. In March of 2022, Judge Matsumae Makumi, in the reopened inquest, ruled that Neil's death had been brought about by foul play. He found that the security branch murdered Neil. He found that police officers Stephen White and Arthur Conrad, both deceased, directly responsible for that murder. He also found that several other officers had perjured themselves under oath and called for their investigation. These included Nicholas Diepers, he died last year, Johannes Visser, Joseph Wunsracht, Daniel Swallopool, a rural fencer, Eddie Chapke. You may ask, what has happened 2 years later? Any charges preferred against those individuals? So far, nothing. So in conclusion, I want to quote a few extracts from the concluding sections of our closing arguments in the reopened inquest. I read as follows. South Africa is a much poorer place without people such as Neil Aggett, Steve Biko, Makatula Simalani, Ahmed Timo, Matthew Geneva, Ford Kalata, Imam Haroon, Lucian Haffiji, Ashley Creel, Rick Turner, Dulcie September, Matthews Mabalani, and many others murdered by the security branch. Their sacrifices paved the way for our freedoms. In these turbulent times, we could have used their wisdom and guiding hands. We take inspiration from their short lives. Neil Aggett was not willing to live a lie. He refused to compromise on the truth, even if it meant his own demise. He believed that he could rely on the truth, that he had not committed any crime and was simply working legally to advance the workers' struggle for social justice. However, he came up against the uncompromising wall of the security branch, comprised of thugs too incompetent and vacuous to fathom between fact and fiction. Whitehead and Conrad would only be satisfied with a full confession, which would have required Neil to live a lie, a step he was not willing to take. This invited even greater abuse from insecure men out to prove themselves. They vented their fury on a defenseless man they believed had betrayed the supremacy of white people. The security branch did crush Aggett, the physical man. In the last days, he was a shadow of his physical self that his loved ones remembered so well. However, his enduring dignity and humanity remained intact till the very end. Neil would have known why he was in John Foster Square at that time. He would have known that his unassuming and quiet resistance to racial domination and his building of a trade union movement posed the greatest threat to his tormentors. He would have known that others would pick up where he left off, and they would not stop until the pernicious system of apartheid was swept aside. Neil's memory is treasured by freedom-loving South Africans. He remains an inspiration to young South Africans working to make a difference in society. His contribution to a free and democratic South Africa lives on. Thank you very much.
Advocate Varney, Kingswood College, would like to thank you for addressing us this morning. We're deeply honored and privileged to have heard your insights on the Neil Aggett case, the complexities of political interference, as well as your other insights on life around here. On behalf of Kingswood College, the team and I would like to offer you a small token of our appreciation.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we close our time together, I invite you just to be still for a moment, and after a brief moment of quiet, let us pray. You are God, God of all, above every earthly and demonic ruler. You are King of kings, you are just, loving, powerful, set apart, holy. No word is unheard by you, no action is unseen, and no thought is unknown to you. And as we journey in Lent towards Easter, we will once again reflect on the glorious truth that because you rose from the dead, Jesus, you are stronger than death. You took on suffering, you took on an oppressive government. You were tortured and murdered, and because you rose again, you established your authority as Lord of all, as Lord of life, as victorious over sin and death. You showed us that your ways work, that peacemaking, forgiveness, non-violence, including others, these things help create your kingdom on earth. You showed us that love ultimately wins. History is strewn with people who choose themselves over others, who choose violence over peace. And we confess, Lord, that we are guilty too, whether out of fear or ignorance or apathy, we mock others, exclude others, look down on others, we lie to suit our own agendas. We dismiss those who have a different opinion to our own. We are easily offended. We are quick to defend what we perceive as our rights, yet slow to rise up to our responsibilities in communities. We are not always teachable nor humble. We'll open our eyes to see how these things damage relationships with others, with you, and by ourselves, with ourselves. And so by your grace, help us to repent, to change our ways before truth meets out its ignored justice. Thank you for the many signs of you and of your kingdom, stories of hope and transformation, acts of generosity, bridge building, understanding, forgiveness, people serving and sacrificing. Some of these stories are our stories. Gracious God, today we remember Neil Aggett and his legacy, a young man who stood against injustice and held within him a vision for a better South Africa. Grant us the courage to follow in his footsteps, to stand firm in the face of injustice, and to speak out against oppression wherever it may be found. May we be inspired by his example to be agents of change in our communities, to challenge systems that perpetuate inequality, and to strive for a world where all are treated with dignity and respect. Bless our efforts as we engage with our communities, seeking to uplift the marginalized and amplify the voices of the oppressed. Lord, we commit our beloved South Africa to you and her leaders. In government, opposition parties, business, academic, and community leaders, we pray for wisdom, integrity, and peace, especially as we go to the polls this year. And lastly, Lord, we pray for ourselves. Reach into our hearts with courage and hope to embrace the tough transformations, to make the real and lasting changes, to seek the truly good answers, to do our part in loving others, for the sake of our families and communities, our countries and our continents, our people and our planet, for the sake of our very selves. And so we do pray that your kingdom will come, your will to be done on earth as it is in heaven, as it will one day be. And so as we go from this chapel now, infuse our actions with courage, compassion, and a relentless pursuit of justice. May Neil Aggett's legacy continue to inspire us to work towards a better, more just world for all. For we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Friends, I invite you to remain seated as the official party leaves, followed by staff and guests, and for invited guests to join us on Club's lawn for refreshments. Thank you.